Hello, my name is Paul Marchbanks, and this is Digging in the Dirt, with the fourth entry in a series on dystopic storytelling. This time around, I'll consider The Construction of Gender, a novel entitled Herland, and a graphic novel, or glorified comic book, by the name of Y, as in Y chromosome, Y, the Last Man. Do women and men need each other, really? Plenty of single-sex communities have prospered throughout history, from faith-based cooperatives devoted to prayer and meditation, to military training programs, to colleges developed atop the principle that mixed-sex education encourages romantic distractions for a heterosexual majority and can actually hamper the pursuit of disciplines not traditionally associated with one's own gender. Girls, for instance, can benefit from learning in an all-female environment, one uncomplicated by either the snide jeers or the amorous importunities of boys who mature physically and emotionally later than girls, and yet, perhaps for this very reason, sometimes feel it necessary to assert their dominance by denigrating their female peers. That such pressure not only negatively impacts girls' interest in STEM fields, but can also lower their self-assurance more generally, became crystal clear to me when I was working in student affairs during my graduate studies at UNC Chapel Hill. Notably, young women had higher GPAs and standardized scores right out of high school than boys, yet betrayed less academic confidence on the assessment tool used by the university to provide a baseline for incoming first-year students. With data like this, combined with stats demonstrating the pervasiveness of sexual assault, domestic abuse, extramarital affairs, and spousal abandonment, should we be actively seeking alternative forms of connectivity that minimize such atrocities by keeping the sexes separated as much as possible? If you think the necessity of procreation is a roadblock to such radical thinking, think again. Artificial wombs have already been used to grow animal fetuses outside the womb. It's not hard to imagine humans eventually designing sperms, eggs, and uteruses in laboratories that eliminate altogether the need to involve both sexes in the propagation of the species. Technology has already altered so many facets of human sexuality, supplying reliable contraception, readily accessible abortions, in vitro fertilization, and gender transition hormone treatments. Humans will continue to manipulate biological processes in newfangled ways in the near future. I foresee gene splicing involving both human and animal DNA, as well as elective surgeries to replace limbs with fabricated replacements, artificial hearts, and carbon fiber reinforced polymer blade-shaped foot replacements are merely the beginning. Given humanity's gender-based troubles and all the alternatives science can generate, should we be actively, methodically creating more single-sex communities? Or are there gendered traits, be they the products of biology, environment, or both, that we would come to bemoan the loss of in such homogenized societies? Gender appears to be incredibly malleable. Does this mean it is a total construct? Our individual assumptions about the relative flexibility or rigidity of gender have been shaped since childhood by our own embodied experiences, by the roles visibly, repeatedly performed by our caregivers, and by whatever behaviors our particular culture happens to approve or discourage. My own ideas about gender were shaped in large part by parents who shared an understanding typical among the U.S. middle class back in the 70s and 80s. Mom and Dad helped each other out with many things, but gravitated in different directions when it came to childcare, house care, and extracurricular activities. My dad did love baking homemade bread and custards during the holidays, and he was famous among our friends for making a frozen banana-based smoothie he called Bernana, but Mom did most of the food prep. She also kept the house clean, with the help of us kids. My most consistent chore was vacuuming, and she maintained our flower gardens. Mom reacted the most swiftly to the plight of her children, providing the ready shoulder to cry on, giving back massages when our own shoulders were stiff and sore, and patiently reading to us before bed whenever we asked. Dad did cry when we were seriously injured. His tears, the second time I sprained my back, modeled a valuable masculine vulnerability. But he tended to be the one who fixed and built things, who maintained our automobiles, and who helped us create school projects involving design work and any kind of engineering. They shared a passion for supporting their kids' forays into music and sports, but gravitated in different directions during their own free time. Mom liked going for long walks with friends, playing the piano, visiting retirees at local care facilities, and spending considerable time in prayer. Dad spent much of his free time in our vegetable garden, involved problem solving with tools in the garage, and helped teach at our church. I began to recognize the degree to which gendered roles were a product of culture in high school literature classes, but it was the psychology courses I took in college that really drove this point home. Biological differences involved in reproduction accounted for some of the tendencies I observed, but many traits I'd assumed were gendered, like courage in the face of danger and caregiving patience, were traditionally associated with one sex or the other due to society's shared, often unquestioned assumptions about family responsibilities, professional life, military service, and the fine arts. What I had thought indelible proved to be surprisingly flexible. Author Charlotte Perkins Gilman reached a similar conclusion half a century before I tardily figured it out, going so far as to posit that radically altering the social environment of young women could revolutionize both their psychological and physical makeup. In this, she was riding a wave generated by earlier feminists like Mary Wollstonecraft and John Stuart Mill. Gilman is best known these days for The Yellow Wallpaper, a short story highlighting all the ways in which medical, often male, arrogance can inadvertently amplify the symptoms of postpartum depression. 23 years later, in 1915, Gilman published a short novel entitled Herland, an idealistic vision of human society governed and populated by women alone. After 2,000 years of trial and error, the inhabitants of this community, hidden away in an unidentified mountainous region, have successfully created a peaceful, self-sustaining culture with no ties whatsoever to the outside world. Like Sir Thomas More's much earlier Utopia, this alternative civilization requires remarkable geographical features in order to maintain its insularity, but also relies on a bit of magic. These women can conceive new life asexually, without any need for men, a special precondition which allows Gilman to elaborate her hypothesis of what humanity might be able to achieve if we could only eliminate the tiresome aggression and competitiveness of machismo. Three men who find their way into this fabled land represent a few of the stereotypical male attitudes these women have managed to cast off in separating themselves from the rest of the world. A young and virile athlete named Terry, who's incredibly popular with the women back home, assumes that his arrival will be hailed as a second coming, and that he'll quickly become every beautiful woman's obsession. He imagines that these women will lack any sort of organization or structure because they will, quote, fight among themselves. Women always do. This internal conflict will presumably prevent them from inventing anything. It'll be awfully primitive, he argues. Terry represents the womanizer, whose preoccupation with the opposite sex is 3 parts desire and 4 parts misogynist condescension. His friend Jeff's own brand of sexism is less demeaning, but arguably no less troubling. Jeff idealizes women in the best Southern style, the narrator explains. Quote, he was full of chivalry and sentiment. Jeff elevates women even as he flattens them, creating a 2-dimensional idol that reflects light in one direction instead of refracting it in many, like a daisy that opens to the sun and follows its path across the sky instead of, say, a leucospermum that puts out blossoms in every direction regardless of time of day. The narrator himself presupposes that this storied land of women must share an arrangement with a similar nearby community of men. Surely, he thinks, they have an annual mating season required for the perpetuation of the species. Without spoiling the plot, I'll merely observe that the matriarchal society surprises the men with its athleticism, enviable productivity, scientific innovation, elimination of sickness and disease, division of labor, educational system that deftly melds the findings of psychology and sociology, and, wait for it, responsible stewardship of natural resources. Quote, all the scraps and leavings of their food, plant waste from lumber work or textile industry, all the solid matter from the sewage, properly treated and combined, everything which came from the earth went back to it. Their society is incredibly cooperative, showing no signs of the combativeness which shapes relations in the outside world. In the absence of romantic passion, Gilman does not incorporate lesbian relationships into her utopia. There's no place for sexual jockeying, strategizing, backbiting, or jealousy. There's not even competition among mothers determined to have the most successful child because the young are separated from their birth moms early on and raised communally. Neither blood ties nor any sense of ownership complicates excitement about each child's developmental strides. The accomplishments of one are celebrated by all. And no parent is trying to live their own unfulfilled dreams through their progeny because not only do they not know to whom they gave birth, but everyone is free to pursue whatever interests them. This probably helps to explain why the men find no evidence whatsoever of irritability in this closed society. These women are living their best lives. No men required. Gilman's message is unequivocal. Many of the feminine charms most appreciated by cisgender heterosexual males, alluring but otherwise impractical styles of clothing, flirtatious affectation, and self-deprecating deference are artificial products of a social imbalance perpetuated by a patriarchal order that demands subservience from those it pretends to honor. If women were free to organize society around their own best principles, they would create a true utopia, particularly if males could somehow be kept out of the mix. Why the Last Man, written by Brian K. Vaughan, illustrated by Pia Guerra, and inked by Jose Marzan Jr., holds a very different view. In issue number 1, every male mammal on the planet suddenly dies, except one guy in his early 20s and the capuchin monkey he's training. The tale spun in this graphic novel suggests that no, actually women would not become infinitely virtuous and conflict-free with men out of the picture. They are not intrinsically good specimens whose potential has been corrupted and distorted by male demands. The graphic novel implies that women are quite capable of self-harming, squabbling over power, racial profiling, and shooting one another all on their own. Thank you very much. A few survivors find peace and flourishing while living in intimate community with one another, but the majority long for the brand of teamwork, friendship, and lovemaking which requires male counterparts. The exceptions only prove the rule that for many people there's something irreplaceable to be found in intersexual connection. What do you think? Would deletion of the men who make patriarchy possible also eliminate pecking orders, deception, and violence? Should we be putting more resources into creating single-sex communities instead of slowly erasing them through integration?